Good afternoon, everybody. I'm David Gordon. I'm the interim director of the Museum of Arts and Design, so I'm going to give you an interim introduction. I used to be the director of the Milwaukee Art Museum until 2008. So I was around as a museum director when the AAMC started. And I have to tell you that I was a very strong supporter of the organization. I think it's a really good idea for curators to have their own organization, and that within that there should be the Center for Curatorial Leadership, so that you have an idea of the enormous range of skills required to become a museum director, which I'm sure you're all eager to be. I gather the other session is about public speaking, so that you're all well endowed on that particular attribute, and what you come here to hear about is proposal writing. I might stay myself. This museum used to be called the American Craft Museum when it was at 53rd Street opposite MoMA. And in its last years there, it changed the name to the Museum of Arts and Design to make public the fact that it did not wish to be associated purely with craft, but wished to elevate craft into the wider arena of contemporary art. A highly controversial move at the time, less controversial over time. But it means that the museum has to fight to make its identity known, and to be known for something more specific. The move to this building happened almost 5 years ago, and it's been a successful move. The museum is much more firmly on the on the map of New York's museums ecology. But we still have this issue of how to make people aware of what it is that we concentrate on. When people ask me, I say, come and see Against the Grain, the exhibition that's on the 4th and 5th floor, because when you look at the objects in that show, you get the point. And here to tell you more about that show is its brilliant curator, a brilliant curator, as so many curators are, but she's particularly brilliant, even in that special breed of brilliance. Lowry Sims, for many years at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, and then was the director of the Studio Museum of Harlem. And the museum was very, very lucky to attract her here, even though she doesn't have a craft background, to widen the horizons of this museum. And her show is completely brilliant and answers the question of what is the Museum of Arts and Design all about. So over to Lowry.
Hello, my name is Lowry, and I'm a recovering curator. I think I can best, Against the Grain is really looking at tendencies in wood of all things since 2000 to sort of take a glance at a medium that is ubiquitous and seems very familiar, and at the same time to really look at how you can sort of put art, craft, and design together. This was the first show I conceived of when I came to the museum in 2007, and I didn't know what the hell I was doing. But I think that the long trajectory of the exhibition gave me a chance to really talk to different artists and colleagues in the field. And it was very interesting because I really felt that, I had to sort of do this kind of very intellectual melding of critical modalities from the different genres. And then I finally figured out, what the hell, I'll just pick things I like. So, but it's very interesting because the whole sense of what is useful, what is, functional, what is not functional, really came out in many interesting conversations. And just briefly, I would direct your attention, if you get a chance to see the show, to A Chair by Martin Puryear. And Martin was the one who sort of really inspired me to do the show. I'd known him for a long time, and I heard a conversation that he had with John Elderfield at MoMA in the fall of 2007 when I was starting here. And he mentioned that when he came to New York, he really decided that he liked to work with materials rather than send his things out to be fabricated. So newly minted at the Museum of Arts and Design, I was into our mantra, materials and process. So I said, aha. So of course, when I went to see Martin, we did a studio visit, my colleague Elizabeth Corain and I, who worked on the show with me. Martin didn't have a stitch of sculpture in his studio, but he was working on a chair. And then I found out that he made all his furniture. And then I knew that his brother also made furniture. So I was sitting there going, So then I said, Martin, this is really brilliant. In the show, I'd like to show your sculpture and your furniture because this really sort of explains the incredible craftsmanship of your sculpture. Now, why did I say that? He went, no, Larry, my furniture is craft and my sculpture is art. I went, oh God, here we go. 2.5 hours later, as he's putting me on the bus after we've had this argument, we spent the next 3 years sparring with each other. You know, I'd see him at different events and we'd sort of like, and then finally, after one event where I just said, you know, Martin, you know, screw this, I can just borrow something from a private collector or museum, and there's nothing you can do about it. He wrote me this letter, Dear Larry Sims, blah, blah, and then he gave some rationale because of the museum and what he understood of the show that he would make me a piece of furniture. So of course, I didn't get it. Then he complained about how much work it was and everything. And then he made a wing chair. So he was sending me these photographs in process. But it was very interesting because I said, now how is he going to get out of this one, you know, in terms of craft? So I asked just before we did the catalog, I said, do we have a title for this piece, Martin? Skeuomorphic wing chair. So I didn't know what a skeuomorph was, so I went right to Merriam-Webster. Skeuomorph is, in case you don't know, but you must because you're curators, it's a thing that has the attributes of something else but is not that thing. And I said, oh, it's like Magritte, ceci, ce n'est pas une pipe. So when you see the chair, it's not a chair. It is a piece of sculpture by Martin Puryear. But I think that, you know, having that kind of dialogue is really sort of encapsulates all the fascinating world I entered when I sort of joined the staff of Museum of Arts and Design. I will close my remarks because I know you're so anxious to get to know how to write grants by saying I understand from my colleague Lisa Messenger here that this morning's session was, one of the sessions was spending on interactivity with the public. We're all trying to sort of deal with that with videos. We haven't gotten to the posted stage, thank God. But I would really recommend, if you have time, to go to the second floor and see the exhibition after the museum. It's a group of young creators and designers, most of them living in Brooklyn, the new epicenter of the art world. And it's really sort of talking about these kinds of issues. The most interesting thing is it was curated by a member of our education staff, Jake Usner, who is manager of public programs and seems to be a young man who has his pulse on new trends. So you can sort of get a glimpse of what things will be with your job after the museum if you go on the second floor. In the meanwhile, have a great session. Welcome to the museum and stay as long as you want. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. You're still with us. I am so pleased to see so many of you here, and so many of you here at the afternoon of our, I guess, third day of this conference. I am just going to, before I bring up Leeanne G-Bowley, who's going to lead this session, a couple of quick things. One, you'll see for those of you who don't have the handout that there isn't any to be had, and that's because I've already handed all what I could carry over here out. But don't be afraid. There are the handouts are simply just the slides, and they will also be uploaded to the AAMC website. So if you don't have it now, you'll get it immediately after this conference, and I'll have it up there within the week. That said, this topic has been in the mix for our conference committee for as long as I've been at the AAMC. And when we first started the idea of these skills-based sessions that would come at the end of the last day of the conference, this one was always, how do you do grant writing for the audience that is this membership, and what would be the right format for this particular topic? So what we've decided on this year is, since it finally made its way onto the agenda, is to to split it up into two parts. First will be this hour short course, and this is a very basics course on grant writing. So some of you may be well versed in some of this material. Others of you are here because you're really interested in getting from the ground up just the basics for grant writing. That is the first hour. The second hour is a panel with a variety of funders who represent various missions in their foundations and their government entities that I think will really reflect a lot of the debate that I've been hearing that's been going on in the conversations about programmatic tension and curatorial practice and curatorial responsibility and civic engagement and how funding structures work to encourage curators to be participating in the grant writing process and what these foundations' priorities are. So I think you'll hear a mix of opinions and a mix of things that some go hand in hand with the basics we're learning in the first hour, and some of them will refute that. And with that, I will ask Leeanne to come to the stage. You have her bio in her packet, and you also have the bios of the panelists that will be immediately following. So as soon as she's finished, I'll just ask the panelists to come directly to the stage. Thank you. Oh, and I should also say, I'm sorry, Leeanne. Leeanne comes from the Foundation Center. And how many of you are familiar with the Foundation Center? Good. So the majority of you. I find the Foundation Center to be one of the best nonprofit resources that I have at my disposal. And I go to the library often. And I will also say on a tidbit that during the New York City blackout, and I can't remember which year it was, I was trapped in the Foundation Center elevator during the blackout. So I really feel a special camaraderie to the facility. And if you haven't gone there, I highly recommend giving a peek. It's fascinating to go through the funding databases and to work with the staff there if you have funding interests and need some help. Thanks.
Great. Thank you, Sally. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Again, my name is Leeanne G-Bowley. I'm the manager of national training at the Foundation Center, and I'd like to thank Sally and AMC for inviting us here. And I'm going to get right started because we have a lot of information to cover in not so long of a time. Just quickly, a little background on myself. Along with being the manager of national training at the Foundation Center, I'm also an artist. I practice in performing arts. I'm a choreographer. But I also curate in a very different way a festival, but it's not exactly or near what all of you do. But I'm very happy to be here with you all and talk about proposal writing basics. And we might not have a lot of time for questions for me right now, but I'm going to stick around for the panel as well. So we'll just plow through. If something needs some more explanation, though, please feel free to raise your hand. Okay, so what are we going to talk about today? Well, we'll talk about the process of getting started, preparing the actual proposal itself, how do we organize, write it, package it, all that good stuff, when we submit the proposal and then after the submission. Now, the main thing is that the Foundation Center really emphasizes that the proposal is part of a process. I know some of you are experienced, so if you have experience, you know it's not just submitting a piece of paper or pieces of paper or an online application and then you get a grant. It's really about cultivation. So this is what we show as the process on your end as the grant seeker. A few things to think about. This class is actually made from comments from grant makers. So it's different from a grant writing class, which is very relevant when you have grant writers standing up here and telling you what they do as practice. This comes from what grant makers say makes a great proposal, what they say is good in the process, and things like that. So that's something to note. Something else to note is the fact that every foundation is different. And that's what I kind of love about having the panel after I speak. We have a phrase that's tired, and if you come up with a better phrase, please let me know. But once you know one foundation, you know one foundation. Meaning they're all so different. And it's really exciting because every foundation is founded by a different person, family, or group of people, and they have different reasons they fund. And so it's hard to just in an hour or a day just say everything you need to know about proposal writing, because the main thing is you need to get to know that funder. You need to get to know their priorities. And I've been hearing about this kind of programmatic versus curatorial thing going on during the conference, and I think doing good research and really finding the right funding partners is key if you're looking for a particular bent on something or you have a particular reason for bringing together a certain show, I think, doing research and finding the people who will fund the type of thing you're going to fund and not trying to fit yourself in a box just for the funder is so important, because funders know when we're being disingenuous. So that's something to keep in mind. Okay, so let's talk about getting started. The first part is the planning process, and this is kind of basic because hopefully you're at an institution that is credible. They're well known for what they do. There's certain levels of that, but if you do what you say you're going to do, you don't drift from your mission, those are important things. You need to identify what kind of support you need, and this goes into the research component. You can't just go to a funder and say, hey, you like art, we do art, hey, let's get together, right? It's much more complicated than that, and really identifying what type of support you need from what funders, tiering the type of support you need. So if you have a really good relationship with one funder and they're willing to give you something for the catalog or something in the process of putting together this show or an exhibit, go to that funder first, get them on board, and then you have more options to go to funders who maybe fund a specific type of thing, but they see that funder over there is on board, so they're going to come on in. And then do you have enough time? This is a long process. How many of you work at organizations where you're not the grant writer, but you've been asked to help in this process? Okay, the majority of you. Is anyone writing all the grants as well as curating? A few of us, less hands. Okay, so if you're doing the grant writing process, hopefully you know how much time you need, you're able to set that schedule. If you're not, you may get an email like I sometimes get, the Foundation Center, we have a grant proposal due tomorrow, I need to know the 10 facts about your program. And that can be difficult, but that happens at every organization, right? That sometimes the grant writing staff doesn't understand what's going on the programmatic side. So it's always important to remind them we need enough time on your end because they're thinking about their timeline, right? As the grant writer, as the development team, you have to let them know your timeline too. And I think having conversations with the development department about what it takes for you, how long this is going to take typically, and having kind of a setup meeting before you launch into a process is really important because that's going to set you up for success when you're reporting, when you're approaching funders, and there's not that miscommunication. So it seems obvious, but especially in larger institutions where there's bureaucracy, sometimes we don't pause to have that kind of setup meeting, and I think it's really vital. Okay, so what most of you are involved in is the information gathering process. You might not be the one putting the actual proposal together, but you need to gather this information. And I think because so many of you are not the actual grant writers in your organization, this course is going to be helpful to know what you need in place, what you need to be prepared to share about your programs so that your grant writing department is ready. It's going to be very relevant to people writing the proposals too, because you need to go through this all yourself. So information gathering. Everything that has to do with this program, from the security guard that has to stay late on Thursday nights because you're showing a film relevant to what's going on in the exhibition, all these types of things have to be gathered. So it's really good to gather all program staff, all even operational staff, and just go through everything that's relevant so you can really create a solid proposal. How is the project that you're working on relevant to the mission of the organization? This is really important. We heard, it was kind of a great setup hearing the Museum of Art and Design explanation here to show how an organization kind of shifted, right? When they're talking about mission, they're talking about what people perceive as their mission versus what is the actual mission, all those sorts of things. That is stuff that a funder is interested in, because they want to make sure the programs that they're funding represent the actual mission of the organization. If it's something over here that doesn't really matter much to the organization as a whole, they're not interested, right? They want to be part of something that's a success. And it all comes down to the fact that there's not a lot of money out there. I always say, even Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which is the largest foundation in the world, for what they want to accomplish, they don't have enough money to do that. They have to be very selective in who they choose to fund, because if they're not successful, one of the programs are not successful, that's money that could have been used somewhere else. That's what this whole process is about, really. It's about proving you're the organization, or this is the project, or this is the exhibition that's going to fulfill the purpose of the mission of your organization and the mission of the funder, right? So I think it's really important that we're really thinking about that when we talk about the concept and how it's relevant to our mission as an organization, or maybe it's also a subcategory. Maybe there's a certain thing you're doing this year, or there's a special initiative. You know, those things are relevant too. Okay, I can't see this, but let's see. Time frame, outcomes. So the time frame is important. I touched upon that already. Your time frame versus the proposal time frame is also something to talk about. Outcomes. This is where some of this push-pull might come from. There's a lot of ROI talk in the nonprofit sector, return on investment. And it starts to get difficult sometimes when we're saying, well, this is just going to make whatever explanation we want to say about showing this art. What is it going to be? What is it going to do? What is the result of doing this thing? Sometimes it's hard to quantify that, but we really need to think about how we can do that. And I do believe it's possible to do that and be still artistically true to what you're trying to do. And it's hard, and it's not easy. I'm not going to say it's easy. But we were just having a discussion. I'm the chair of the junior committee of Dance NYC, and we were just having a discussion about, well, how do we quantify what we do? And someone said, what if we just gave a survey at the beginning of a dance performance at BAM? Or actually, they were like, what if we had those little dials that they have on those reality shows? And when the audience first gets there, they say, how are you feeling? You know, and have some kind of emotional spectrum. And then at the end of the show, have the same thing and have them equate. When I came in here, I felt this way, and I'm happier now, or whatever the emotional shift is. That is an outcome, and that's very relevant. And actually, there's been a lot of studies right now about happiness and how you quantify that and how that's important in life. So we may need to be creative, but knowing what the outcomes are for our project, for our exhibit, for our show, that's very important. Okay, and I can't stress that enough. And the last thing is cost. Okay, we're going to talk a lot about budget. So we'll come back to that. Okay, research. So I teach this course all over and other courses, and my husband sometimes gets to come along, and he's in banking. He just got his MBA. And I was teaching the class, and he came up to me at the end, and he goes, Leeanne, the fit is go. And that was from a car commercial at the time. And I said, okay, corporate guy, why are you bringing up a car commercial after I just taught this wonderful class to nonprofits? And he was like, that's what the whole class was about, Leeanne, the fit. He kept talking about it. And it dawned on me that this process that we have to go through that can be difficult sometimes, or sometimes we feel like we're jumping through hoops to get these proposals out, that's not what it's about. And I touched upon this already. It's about proving that you are the organization that fits into the mission and the goals of the foundations you're approaching. If you look at this process that way, I think it's so much easier than thinking, I have to have these 10 outcomes, I have to have this kind of result, I need to do this report, and that gets very, I don't know, as an artist, it's like, well, I'm just doing it because it's this, and why can't you just accept that it's this, right? But if you understand that it's part of this process where the funder wants to accomplish these things, and you're just proving that you can accomplish them, and you're the right organization to do it, you're the best organization out there to do that, you're the best curator to do that, I think it just becomes easier, and then our proposals get better, because we're starting to understand where the funder's coming from, right? That directly relates to research. I've had funders come to the Foundation Center. We hear all the time that they get proposals that are not relevant to what they do. And that can be for a couple reasons. Sometimes we think our project is so great that anyone should fund it, right? It's just so good, so it's okay that you fund healthcare, but you know, this is the best art you've ever seen, so you should fund it too. That's an extreme example, but that happens all the time. And other people just don't care to do the research. Now, you're professionals, I expect that at your organizations you are doing research, right? So it might be more of the first than the second, thinking, well, it's kind of on the fringe of what they do, but maybe we can convince them, right? It's really important to find the fit with the funder and fit into what they're doing. Now, once you have a relationship with a funder, maybe there's some breadth, and I would be interested to hear what some thoughts are about that maybe on the panel, but you know, you can't just send an unsolicited proposal to someone if it's not what they fund. of course, geographic focus. I mean, this is very basic stuff. If they fund in San Francisco and they only fund in San Francisco, even if they're located down the block, they're not funding here, right? So you have to find the funder who funds in your geographic area. And type of support. Some funders will fund only certain things in your project. You have to keep that in mind. And you have to ask for the specific thing that they fund. If they don't only fund one type of support, that's great because it gives you a little bit more breath, some more breathing room to approach them and ask for the things that are harder to fund in your proposal. Okay? How can you do research? Well, we already got a wonderful plug, thank you, Sally, about the Foundation Center. We have a database of over 100,000 grant makers. It's fully searchable. That's your first step in research. From there, you look at their 990 forms or 990 PFs of the foundations. Those are their IRS reporting forms. But the first step really is using the Foundation Directory online. Now, I work at the Foundation Center. I've been there 7 years, so of course I'm going to say it's a great database. It's an awesome database. I'm in Starbucks. I hear someone saying they're working in a nonprofit. I turn around and say, have you come to the Foundation Center yet? Because I think it's that important. On the junior committee, I school everyone on that committee. This is the Foundation Center. This is how you use the database. And so everyone I work with, from people who are very experienced but maybe haven't done development before, to people who are starting out in the field, I tell them about the database. And I think it's really a great tool. So I'm in earnest when I say you should come to the Foundation Center and learn how to use it. Okay, we talked about the IRS reports, you know, the 990s and the 990 PFs. That's when you dig deeper, when you find potential prospects. The first step is to find, okay, in their guidelines, what do they say their goals are? In their guidelines, what are they funding? But you need to take it a step further and look at their actual 990s and look at their grants lists and see, how do they fund? Do they fund the same organizations every year? Do they make organizations take off a year? Do they fund everyone at the same level, or do the grant amounts grow over time? That's the kind of information, by taking a highlighter out, going through 990s and finding other museums and seeing what they're funding, you get that kind of information. Okay? Now, different funders put different amounts of information in their 990s. Some you'll get a great description of the program. Others you'll just see mostly a list of the different organizations. So you might have to even dig deeper if you're trying to find out what they're funding in particular. Because if it says the MoMA, it could be 100,000, possibly more different things, right? Just knowing that they fund the MoMA doesn't mean they're going to fund what you're doing, right? Not just because you might be very similar to MoMA, but what is the project they were funding? Okay, so that's kind of the heavier, more in-depth research that you would be doing. And then we have training programs on how to use the database. There's a great webinar. It's recorded. It's live. There's an in-person class. I always suggest if you're going to come use the database, you can come in cold. The librarians are great. They're going to spend some time with you to get you oriented. But spend the hour, learn how to use the ins and outs of the database, come on in, and then you can really use your time wisely. Some of the larger institutions, you might already have a subscription to the Foundation Directory online, so you wouldn't have to come into the center. So that's an option for you as well. Okay? Any questions up to this point? I'm doing okay on time, so. Okay, we're good. Preparing the proposal itself. So this is a baseline 10-page proposal. This is what we suggest. We'll go through all of these things in brief, but know that proposal lengths are changing. Submission of proposals is changing. When I started at the Foundation Center, which was only 7 years ago, seems like a long time, but it was only 7 years ago, we said many funders don't have websites, and it was true. That's starting to change. Before, online applications weren't the norm. They're not the norm yet, but they're growing in popularity, and we'll talk about that during the submission part of the conversation. So know that this, I think, if you write this 10-page boilerplate proposal, it's helpful because you have all the information you need, but then you're going to tailor it depending on the funder you're approaching. Right? And the education department is going to take that proposal and tailor it one way. You guys are going to look for the funders who care about what you're presenting and tailor it a different way. But if all of that information is included in one 10-page proposal and you can tailor it, I think you're good to go. Okay, so we have here what it looks like: executive summary, the narrative, and the budget is always one page. We'll talk about the budget, and the supporting materials and appendices. The one thing that I'll touch upon briefly that's not in the rest of the slides is the title page and the table of contents. There are certain things that should be on the title page. A title is one of them. It seems obvious, but it's somewhat easier if there's the name of an exhibition, you have a title, right? So that's kind of obvious. But sometimes our projects don't have titles, so it's just easier for the funder to identify with the project that way. Other things that should be there: the name of the funder, the date or the cycle or the submission deadline you're applying to, the amount you're requesting should be right on the cover page, the title page. It should be in a number of places. You'll see we mentioned the amount you're requesting in a number of locations. That's because it's the first step in seeing if you've done your research. Remember I said take out the highlighter and look at funding patterns. If you are a first-time applicant and they usually only fund $5,000 for a first-time applicant and you're asking for $50,000, it may be in the range, but you haven't done your research, right? So that's what you put on the funder side. You put your contact information, meaning your organization's contact information, and someone at the highest level, usually the president of the organization, CEO, or the board president, because technically this proposal is going from the top of your organization to the top of the foundation or the funder's organization. If you have a relationship with a program officer, you can ask if it would be helpful to put your information down and that program officer's information down as well. And that's what you put on the title page. So title, funder's name, contact, the amount you're requesting, the application deadline or the cycle you're applying to, and your organization's contact information. Table of contents. So there's one thing I think I've driven home: the fit is important, right? That's one thing about your proposal. The second thing is that it needs to be easily read. I need to be able to get through your proposal and understand what it is, if I'm an expert in the field or if I'm not an expert in the field. A table of contents is just a tool to help me get through your proposal. So if it's a 2-page proposal, we don't say to the development people, hey, I went to the Foundation Center's proposal writing class, you're supposed to have a table of contents, I don't care what you say, right? You have a table of contents only if it helps you get through the proposal, because certain funders like to look through certain things. They're looking through stacks of proposals like this. If your statement of need reminds them of another one, they might want to pull both out and compare. If it's a 10-page proposal, it's helpful to have that title page, or table of contents. Okay, so we'll go through the rest of these things. These are tips from the funders to us. They say these things because usually they get proposals that don't do these things, right? So first is start with an outline. In the packet that you will receive, there is an outline. It's a sample outline. It is for a human services organization. So it's more for you to just see what is the setup of an outline. An outline is an internal document. It's not something you send to the funder. It just helps us organize our thoughts and make sure we include everything, right? It's a great internal document for those internal conversations to be able to say, oh, wait, grant writer, why? Or, oh, wait, I had this conversation with the education department. Are we missing something? Could you check this? Or you say, oh, this is an important point. I don't see it in the outline. Could you make sure you include this? So I think this is a great document for internal checks. Okay, so then they say name your project. We talked about the title. I think that's self-explanatory. Keep language clear and simple. Use action words. Avoid jargon and acronyms. This goes under the jargon and acronyms goes under the category of know your funder. So some funders are going to be very attuned, that you're approaching, will be very attuned to what you're doing, and jargon may be appropriate. Now, if you think it is, you've got to be 100% sure, because when you send a document, and it might be a very well-versed person, if they don't understand what you're saying, it doesn't make them feel good. It doesn't make them want to go, oh, I'll Google that now, right? It may make them want to say, okay, I'm going to come back to this, very well-intentioned, and maybe not have a chance to come back to it after they looked up what you said. So you want to be very clear. You want to have action words and speak as though you know this is going to happen, because funders don't like to fund things that may not happen. What if I write you a check and then the exhibit doesn't happen? I want to know this is happening. I want to know other people are on board with you, and I want to know it's going to be excellent. So we have to speak in that language. When we are funded, we will do this. We will accomplish these things. The would, should, could, go through, Control F, find all those words, take it out, change them. And I think I drove home the point about clear and simple language. It's got to be straightforward. If I'm reading a bunch of these, yours should stand out to me, right? Yours should be easy to get through. That can be difficult for someone when you're piecing together language from different departments, different priorities, so you need to make it as easy for whoever's writing it, or if you're writing it yourself, to follow a clear narrative. Don't forget to revise and edit. If you're writing this yourself, you might find, okay, I've seen this how many times, I never want to see this thing again, because I've been spending so much time with it. That is not the time to look at it again. Put it away, come back to it. You should also have someone else look over your proposal, preferably 2 people. Someone who's familiar with the project to see if you left something vital that's out, or left something out that's vital. The second person is someone who doesn't understand the project or doesn't know the project, to make sure you haven't made any mental leaps. That someone who's never heard about your project before would not be able to make those mental leaps, right? Spouses can be a good person to check it out. Unless you've told them everything already, then they're not. My poor husband can't review my proposals anymore because he hears too much ahead of time. So those are the tips. I think that's important. Again, they come from the funders, and it means they're getting stuff that's not organized. They're getting stuff that's using jargon that doesn't need to use jargon. And that is that. Oh, and acronyms. So people always ask me, well, in the beginning of the proposal, can I just write out the really long thing and then put the acronym next to it? These proposals get split up sometimes, so just keep that in mind, because if someone only gets one part of the proposal, you want to make sure they still know what that acronym is. I'll use MoMA again. We all know what MoMA is. Maybe a funder doesn't know. Maybe you're approaching someone who doesn't, right? So you just want to be clear. And that, again, goes under know your funder. Okay, statement of need. Now, this is a place where people are like, oh, it's so easy when you work at a homeless shelter to be able to say, this is the need, but I don't know what we're going to say about our need. I challenge you to find a way to make it very, very engaging, very provocative, the need of what you're doing. Because I believe there is need. Funders who fund in the arts believe there is a need. You just have to make it clear. And make it clear outside of the bubble of your institution. I was speaking to someone at Columbia who had a grad student who was really excited to write their first proposal, and they wrote their first proposal, and it was okay, except all they talked about was how the project was going to help Columbia and how it was going to advance Columbia. And that's great, and maybe a funder who really cared, maybe an alum would be really into that. Typically, a foundation is going to care more about what is the broader impact outside of that, especially in programmatic work, right? Now, that doesn't mean that someone's got to be able to take an Instagram of everything and be able to upload it to Twitter and so on. It just means that there's got to be something, and you have to explain it. You have to have facts and statistics to back these things up. Fact can be a quote from someone. Fact can be part of a review. What else do I want to say about that? So it's important also that that comes from outside your little bubble. If the fact or statistic comes from the organization that's going to benefit, the artist it's going to benefit, it's less strong than if it comes from outside. Audience and community that you're bringing in. Why is this particular project relevant to that? Okay, the next thing is your goals and objectives. Your goals, I like to think of them as like the broad, beautiful things you want to accomplish with this. The objectives are more specific, and we say they're SMART, specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. Realistic and achievable are just as important as measurable. because if you can't actually accomplish what you're setting forth, that's going to be a problem. So you want to make sure it's actually achievable, realistic, time-bound, measurable, and there are ways to measure things. If you have questions about being able to create outcomes and measurable things, check out the Center for What Works. The Foundation Center is actually in the midst of a webinar series with them. They're an excellent organization. They took on Rensselaerville Institute, which you may be familiar with. They're kind of the leader in outcome thinking. They worked with Altman Foundation when Altman went over to outcome thinking. So there are resources for you. Centerforwhatworks.org, they've got some great resources around setting outcomes and things of that nature. Okay, so these things are very straightforward. Methods and staffing, again, just proving that you are the organization to do this. Who is on your staff? Why are you the ones who should be doing this project? What are your methods? If your methods are clear and they make sense, that's going to be better for you to get funded rather than something that doesn't really make sense. And when I compare two projects, I can very easily tell, if I've reviewed a lot of proposals, I can tell what's realistic and what's going to get done and what is not quite clear. And you know, this organization hasn't quite figured out how they're going to do this project. That becomes clear in the proposal. Collaboration, if you are collaborating, you want to talk about it. If you can replicate this, or if something from the project can be replicated elsewhere, that's great, because this means you're, again, looking outside yourself as institution or program, and you're able to say, as a result of doing this project, all of these other things can happen. We can show another museum how to do this sort of exhibit. By working with this other partner, we're able to bring in more audience, we're able to, you know, help these artists in this way. Whatever that is, you want to highlight it. Okay, so sustainability is another big thing. Things are rough right now, especially for the arts, because, you know, when I have a choice of feeding someone or having the arts, what happens, right? These are things we hear about. These are questions that we know the answers to. So now more than ever, sustainability is important. A lot of your projects are finite because it might be an exhibition, happens once, doesn't happen again, right? So this might not be as much of an issue for you, but how does the project help sustain the organization? Is there some kind of entrepreneurial aspect of this program that we can share? And is it attractive to other funders? These are questions to ask yourself. Okay, so the budget. The budget's important. It's one page, and in numbers, the funder's able to tell what your project's all about. People who have experience reviewing proposals can very quickly tell if something's amiss from your budget. Red flags, we call them. So there's two sides. There's the direct costs, which include personnel. Yes, proposals include salaries, because people have to do the work of many of our projects, right? Personnel costs, people who are actually employed at your organization. Non-personnel costs, so all the other stuff that you need that's directly attributable to the project. And consultants. Any consultants would be included in non-personnel because fringe is not included for them. When we're figuring out how much these things cost, we need to get estimates. Usually we want to get 3 quotes for every cost and then choose the one that's most reasonable. So that's direct costs. Indirect costs are harder to get. Now, if we talk about indirect outside of our project and we talk about general operating support usually means it can be used for anything. Sometimes that's not true. And then we can also talk about overhead costs, administrative costs, all those things. There's lots of words to call the thing that people don't tend to want to fund. You can't put your name on the lighting bill. You can put it on the theater, but you can't put it on the lighting bill. You can put it on the exhibit, you can't put it on the lighting bill. So because, no, let me take that back, not because. It is hard to get this funding. This funding is necessary to fund our projects. If the lights aren't on, we can't have people come see our stuff, right? So we include a portion of the overhead in our project budget, but it's relative to the size of the budget. And you should be able to get from your bookkeeper, from your development office, from your accounting office, what your overhead rate is, right? This isn't a budgeting class. We won't go through the math to do it. But the overhead rate is something that your whole organization should have. The overhead rate should be the same for the whole organization. You have your project direct costs. Say your overhead is 20%. You take 20% of the direct costs. That's the overhead. And the bottom line is both the overhead, the indirect cost, and the direct cost. And that is the project budget. Sometimes funders don't want to see certain things in our budget. So we might have to not include them in the same way. I mean, the ideal is that the same one-page budget goes to every funder we go to. But even, for example, I'm a Queens-based artist. If I apply to the Queens Council on the Arts, they do not let you put in in kind. They don't allow you to put in kind in the actual proposal budget. That's a separate section. So my budget to them looks different than to other funders, right? So pay attention to exclusions, pay attention to different formats from the funder. But the main thing is that the costs have to be reasonable and realistic. If you think, oh, we'll be the bargain basement exhibit, that's not going to be good because I'm going to know that there's something missing or that you lowballed something. The other thing I hear all the time is, oh, well, we'll just inflate the numbers in case we don't get all the funding we ask for. No, right? It's got to be a realistic budget. Budget narrative, sometimes funders request a budget narrative. Otherwise, if something could be a red flag and you want to explain what it actually is, why a number is so high, why a number is so low, something like that, you would footnote it and explain it in the bottom. Okay? Another thing people ask about all the time is in-kind or volunteers. If we can't include it in the budget, what do we do? If your project is very supported by some kind of in-kind gift or volunteer staff, that's something you could mention in the narrative of the project and just in one line explain how it's so great that you have such wonderful support from the community or what have you, and then move on. But it wouldn't be included in the budget typically. Organizational information. The funder wants to know who is this organization we'd be funding. They're not just funding the project, they're funding the organization as well. What are your other programs? How does this program fit into your other programs? And who is on your board and who are your staff members? This is, if it's not included in the narrative itself, may be included in the appendix. Okay. Conclusion. This is the one place to kind of now tug on the heartstrings or go a little bit, why is this project so important for you as a curator, for the museum as a whole? What are you planning to accomplish? Why it's important, who will benefit? Those three things are the fit again. You're just saying, these are the things you care about as a foundation, as a funder. This is what we're going to accomplish. Look, it's the same thing. Executive summary, you write that last. It's a one-page executive summary that is the whole proposal in an executive summary. This may be the only thing the Board of Trustees reads before they make a decision whether to fund your project or not, so it's really got to be very good, very succinct. You can see it includes all the same things, all of the fit information. It also includes how much your budget is and how much you're requesting, which again, funders tend to want to be part of a group that are funding your project, not just a sole funder. That can be different depending on who you're approaching, but in general, you're asking for a portion of the whole project budget. A little bit of background on your organization, like a sentence, maybe two. A lot of times they'll ask for supporting materials, IRS determination letter almost every time, 990 form, financial documents. Whoever is sending these proposals in should just have a drawer full of these things and they're just able to take them out and put them in the back. Now, board and staff, you can see sometimes go here if that's not in the narrative. Other supporting material. We love to give funders lots of stuff because that letter from our councilman is going to make or break our proposal. Probably not, unless they're looking for something in particular. You don't want to give a lot of extra information that wasn't requested. But if something really highlights, is able to put in a real life kind of view or focus what you're talking about in your proposal, that's when you include some supplemental material. Of course, if they ask for supplemental material, you include it. But if they're not requiring images, you're not giving it to them. If they're not requiring a video, you're not giving it to them. If they are, you definitely include it, and it's, of course, majestic quality. But the other thing we want to say, if you have a video or photo or something that you really think is important, you could always include a link to a Vimeo, a YouTube page, or something like that, but I would never hang my hat on something that's not in the narrative, right? Well, our proposal's okay, but this video is fantastic. If they're not requesting it, they might not look at it. Okay, so submitting the proposal, cover letter goes on top. You reference a recent conversation with the funder. You say what is in the proposal in case something gets lost in the shuffle. They know you meant to include everything. Offer to meet, answer any questions, etc. Then comes the proposal, and then the appendices and supporting materials. You do not bind this. If the funder does not request a certain binding, you do not bind this in any way. Use a binder clip. This is so that if I want to tear this thing apart, make copies, send it to different people, it's easy for me, and you're not spending money. Sometimes when we're approaching funders and we get a beautiful color bound thing and then we send it to them, think about that if it was your kids and they were like, I need $20 or $40 to go to the movies, and you're like, well, we just gave you your allowance, what did you do with it? I got these really great shoes. Same kind of thing. You're approaching the funder, you're asking for money, but you also made this really fancy proposal. Why are you spending your money on the proposal? It's different when you're approaching individuals. It's different sometimes when you're approaching corporations, but they don't need fancy binding. They need to know that this project's going to be amazing, and it's going to happen, and it's going to happen the way you said it's going to happen. Let's see. Some other things to think about. Sometimes funders have their own application form, and then you use that. Sometimes funders request a common application form, so it's one type of form. Then you put different appendices on it depending on who you're approaching and send that in. First contact. So a lot of funders will tell you how to first contact them. Maybe it's a letter of inquiry, a phone call, etc. Again, this is relationship building. It's not just simply, I found these people online, I'm going to send them a proposal, and hopefully we'll hear back. You're building a relationship. You're inviting them to events. You're letting them know how things are going. Because funders don't like to be seen as ATMs, right? We only go when we need something, which that analogy is not going to work for much longer because now ATMs take deposits too. But the idea that you're only approaching the funder when you need the money, then you disappear, poof, and then you come back. Building an ongoing relationship is really key. Okay, so once you submit, you have a phone conversation with the funder. If something really exciting happens, give them updates. Board contacts. So this is a tough one because board contacts exist in real life. In the abstract, in the Foundation Center, we can say, you don't use your board contacts to get favor with the foundation and blah, 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 blah. You never want to go over the head of staff at a foundation. That's what I'm going to leave you with on board contacts. You're never going to have your board member say, hey, Jim, I'm on the board of this fabulous museum. You're on the board of the XYZ Foundation. You should fund us. And Jim says, yeah, sure, and that happens. That's not great, right? Especially if there's staff reviewing all the proposals. So if there is a board relationship, someone on your board knows someone on the foundation board, talk to the program officer about how to proceed with that. If the answer is yes, you send a handwritten thank you note right away. You also reply in the manner you received the yes. So if it's an email, you reply with an email right away with a thank you. I can't say how much handwritten notes go, how far those go. They're vital. Even people who teach this class, I'm lucky that some of the people who teach proposal writing have also donated to the dance company that I work with in Queens. They got handwritten notes from some of the board members from this dance company and came up to me, Leanne, I was so touched that I got this board member note. I was like, you teach the class where we tell people you have to do that. Why are you surprised? So that means it's rare. It doesn't always happen. Stand out from the crowd and send these great handwritten notes. Send it to the, president to president thing, but also send it, if you're working with a program officer, sincerely thank them. It's hard work. They've stewarded your proposal. They've championed your proposal. Send them a sincere thank you. Keep the funder informed. Like I said, the ATM syndrome, we want to avoid that. And you talk about the renewal request pretty early on. Can we apply again? And this is because, again, this is a process that takes time. So by the end of the first process, you're already getting ready for the next proposal. If the answer is no, don't take it personally. There's limited funds, and we can only fund so much, right? Don't take it personally. But do call the funder, and I don't like the whole find out why you didn't get funded. Talk about potential for future funding. In that conversation, you'll probably find out why you didn't get funded. There might be comments for you, feedback. And feedback from someone who has turned you down, that's vital, because they're going to tell you things that no one else is going to tell you. Right? So I've come to, I never like getting rejected, but when I do, I really kind of relish the time to talk to the funder, because I get information that I would have never thought of. Maybe we didn't explain this clearly. Maybe we thought this program was really straightforward, and maybe it's not. Now I know this from this conversation. Okay. Right on time. So how do you get help from the Foundation Center? I think we've all traveled here from many different places, I'm assuming. Yeah? We have what we call cooperating collections throughout the country. These are libraries, nonprofit research centers that have our database available for free. So you don't have to come to the Foundation Center in Union Square. If you're in Missouri, there's probably a Foundation Center cooperating collection close to you. We have proposal writing courses, full day. We have a proposal writing boot camp that we're just launching. We have sample documents online, so that's available for you too. And then we have this wonderful thing called grantspace.org. It's kind of like the closest thing to our library online. If I don't know the answer to a question, I go to our knowledge base, because there's so much information there. And our online librarians keep the information very up to date. They like to say that they curate the information. And that's that. And here's some more information about our grant-seeking courses. But I really thank you for your time and attention. I know some of you said you were more advanced, so hopefully I was able to give you something that you maybe didn't hear before, or just reinforced your good practices. And if you're new, hopefully you have a better idea of what this process is. Thank you very much.